Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate your time and dedication into wanting to learn something new. Today, we'll be talking about coping with change, or another way of putting it, transitioning. And this is by myself, prevention educator Ruth Delpino. And we're going to be talking about ourselves in a second. So first thing, hi, my name is Ruth Delpino. I am a prevention educator. I am the Mercer County Grant Program Coordinator for the Mercer Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Global Studies, Political Science, and American Studies. I'm certified in teaching English as a foreign language, life skills training, and leadership, in case you want to know my context and the background and know where I'm coming from. So why this program and why this presentation? One, this is not to scare you. And once again, I always start my presentations this way because I want people to know that when you watch this, when you're engaged in this presentation, this is not something that is meant to say, oh, we need to look out for these things. This is scary. It's more like these are the things that we should be looking out for and how can we help. So one thing, this is not to scare you. Two, this is to inform you. This is also not a parenting class. You are the best parent for your child. You know them the best. You've probably known them longer than they've known themselves. This is also not just a parenting presentation. This started out as one, but over time, we really realized that there is a definite need for people to understand youth positions, just in people who work with youth in general. So we will be talking about that as well, being an educator in the classroom and how to engage with youth. Also, my perspective is shaped by my approach and my learning experiences. So as we're sort of walking through these presentations, understand that anything that I bring, anything that is in this presentation is evidence-based and evidence-informed. Evidence-based meaning I run quite a few different programs at the Mercer Council, Too Good for Drugs, life skills training, Parents Who Host Lose the Most, those sorts of things. They are evidence-based presentations, programs, and I take those evidence-based programs and I put that data and all of those sorts of approaches into my presentations, and evidence informed in that I take evidence or empirical studies that look at a lot of different aspects that we're talking about, put them into the presentation, and put the resources usually in the presentations below. So if you're watching this on the YouTube channel right now, then you can look below in the description and find all of those resources and look through this presentation with me so that we can sort of come to an understanding together. We will be moving on. Once again, if you want to utilize the chat for any questions or concerns or any comments about anything that I may say, anything you disagree with or want to learn more about, please let me know, because this is a learning experience for all of us. So first thing that we sort of want to talk about is, what is change? And I think that when we're sort of looking at it, we'll say, well, change is just something that makes something new or makes different. Yes, definitely. There are a lot of different ways that we can talk about change. And I think what we need to understand too is that it is meant to modify, and there are many different types of change. And just before I really start to get into this presentation, I don't know if anyone wants to keep a tally of how many times I say the word change, because it will be a lot. And my apologies if it becomes something that is a little hard to bear hearing over and over again, but here we are and we're learning about something new. So, but there are many different types of change that exist, right? They can be trauma. They can be, oh, I have two people in the waiting room. My apologies. Just making sure that everyone's in. All right. There we go. And so there are many different types of change. Divorce, death, a new move, that all can participate into the trauma category. Something that is an opportunity, a new school, new people to interact with, a new mindset to adapt to, and understand that when we are looking at change and we are looking at these sorts of things, a lot of the time that can be something that is a trauma or an opportunity is shaped by perspective. And we're going to be talking about how we can sort of help frame those perspectives and make sure that we help children and youth especially to sort of see their situation in different ways. But yes, change can be a lot of different things. It can be an opportunity that is, and an opportunity is something that can sometimes be scary, but can also be good for someone. But we'll be talking more about that throughout this presentation. If anybody would like anything to add about what change actually is, you can put that in the chat box as well. So we're going to be talking about, so why change? Why is change scary? There can be a lot of different reasons why change is scary. And when people experience change, the fear of what will come after can be debilitating. So it is a fear. it is anticipation. There can be levels of anxiety due to that anticipation. And there's actually something called fear of the unknown. And it is a medical diagnosis. So I'm just going to go here really quickly, just in case, just to prove that it actually is a thing. And it can happen to anyone. And the most common symptoms of this type of phobia can be fast heart rate, quick shallow breathing, tense muscles, feeling of weakness, sugar spikes. And just to understand that there is actually a physical, visceral response to coping with change, to coming to terms with what change looks like. So that's not just something that people can say, oh, you're being silly, or you're not interacting with your environment correctly. It's that this person in particular does actually have a fear of what is unknown to them, of things that can be changed, or of things that will change in the future. And fear of the unknown is definitely much more broad, in that unknown can encompass a lot of things, and it doesn't necessarily mean transitions, but it can mean change. It can absolutely mean a transition. So we're going to look through that as we move forward. And so while we're talking about fear of the unknown being debilitating, we can also talk about how change can be violent. And there are a lot of different ways that change can be, right? So change is scary because of the ways that people interpret, interact with, and express change throughout society. And this is definitely one way of doing that. So this is a study that was actually done. It's by the Washington Post, but they cite a lot of different ways how people are talking about why people are still racist. And why do we talk about racism and bigotry and all these sorts of isms in change? Well, especially because when people strive to have their place in equal standing in society, that requires change. That requires adaptability. That requires policy change. That requires making your voice heard in a way that people can listen and understand and empathize. And those things are not easy. Those things definitely meet resistance. And so when we're talking about this sort of resistance, that resistance can actually be perpetuated through time. And this is a great article. It cites a lot of different studies. I think, oh, my apologies. I think that it is a really great thing to look at. So it sort of talks about America's race problem, right? And they really did talk about the Nazi march, I believe in Charlottesville, North Carolina or South Carolina. I'm so sorry, my geography is not great. Virginia, possibly, I don't know. But anyway, they were talking about what are the causes of people being racist. And essentially the culmination of this article is saying that racism in itself is something that has been the norm for so long that when you change things, people become very resistant to it because of the fear of that change. And when we talk about that, we're sort of saying, oh, I have something in the chat here. Yes. Yeah, Charlottesville, Virginia. Okay, thank you. Yes, so Charlottesville, Virginia. And what we're talking about here is white supremacy, isms of any sort, systems in place to go against other people, basically taught these people who were raised to be white supremacists to fear something and someone they do not know. This means they are taught their way of life, or the way of life of other people, of the other, is threatening, that the existence of another person is threatening. And this is, it is dangerous because the presence of another person that represents that change is an act of violence in itself in their eyes, where they say, if you exist, then you must be something that must be terminated. You must be something that must go away because you represent everything that I don't want to change in my life. And that mindset is very scary. That mindset can be very hard to interact with, to deal with, but understand that this is not to justify racism or bigotry or any ism of any sort, but this is to recognize that the fear of change in one's life is hard and has hard to bear consequences, as well as political and social opinions that change the way people interact with their environment. Now, that is a lot to take in, right? That's a lot to say, but it is also something that must be addressed because Our youth today are being taught how to embrace change. They're being taught how to interact with their environment. And if they are not taught in a way that is good for themselves and society, then it can turn into violent circumstances. And in that way, that can be very difficult for themselves to deal with, for other people to deal with, and possibly to sometimes mitigate any crime that may happen later on in their lives, right? So when we're sort of talking about this, these people in this article are adults. They're people that have grown into their own opinions, their own political views, their own social standing, those sorts of things. Now, how do we sort of say, if they're adults and they have been so resistant to change, then how in the world do we expect people who are young to embrace change? And we're going to be talking about that in a lot of different ways. All right. So change can be scary for adults. And obviously, this is the extreme spectrum, but to understand that this is a reality and it can and does happen because people are resistant to transitions in their own life and society. So change is scary for adults. So how do we expect our youth to embrace these sorts of things? We're going to talk about it. We're sort of going to get down and possibly give them some tools that can help them get through their day to day. Now, when we are talking about it, the best way to break down change and the best way to break down transitions is to understand what good change and bad change can be. And really, the whole thing about being good and bad is all about perspective, but some things and reality are just bad and good. Like a new job can be a great thing, a new school can be a wonderful thing, a healthy relationship can be a great part of a person's life, friends that understand you. For bad change, it could be death, trauma, abuse. ACEs, I have talked about ACEs quite a bit. I have quite a few different videos that I've done on it, so I'm not going to talk about it ad nauseum here, but essentially to understand that ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it is a phenomenon, it is a health phenomenon that talks about how people's trauma in their lives and how things that really hurt children in their lives can affect the way that their body interacts with their environment later on in life. And there are quite a few different studies on this. I will cite them below so you can look more into it, but understand that bad change can be those ACEs. It can be those adverse childhood experiences. Also understand that good change can be voluntary and involuntary. So example, good and bad change can be the difference between good and bad because of things that people choose to do versus things that are happening to them. And I think that can be a really important distinction for children and youth to understand that good change are the things that you have in your control. Those are the things that you choose to change. And sometimes when things are involuntary, they can be bad. They can be things that they don't like because they don't have control over them, and it changes the way they interact with their environment. Now, if you have any comments or concerns, once again, you can put them in the chat as we move forward. So here we go. So I'm going to be talking about this, and I actually really like this quote. It is Complacency is the Kiss of Death by Cherie Redsey. I always, the script is Redstone, my apologies, Redstone. So there are a lot of different ways that we can interpret this, right? But I always look at it as this is a place, this saying has a place in our society, it has a place in business, it has a place in our lives. But when we sort of embrace these things, we need to understand that complacency is not always the kiss of death, because when we are complacent, there are things that we just think of as stable, and complacency and stability are two sides of the same coin. And depending on your perspective and depending on the full picture that people paint themselves as, we can sort of see how it becomes one thing versus another. And I also want to say that when people use this phrase, they use it to sort of, how do I say this, to sort of embrace the hustle of society, to sort of say, you know what, I'm just going to say yes to everything. I'm going to say yes to so many things. And that can be good for people. That can be great for people, but that can also mean that people aren't taking a step back, breathing through that decision and understanding what that means. Now, when we're talking about this sort of thing, when we say yes to change, there is an anticipation. There is an anticipation of growth and opportunity. And when those opportunities come, they do come with its sort of transition because we embrace them and we welcome them into our lives. Now, embracing change can be a great thing. And what I do want to talk about here is that this woman in particular, I didn't catch her name, but essentially, this is a TED Talk, and she talks about how she quit her full-time job 10 days before she got married. And she said that a lot of people had a lot of comments and questions on why she quit her job. Was it to stay at home? Was it because she was being complicit with her husband who wanted her to stay home? These are the sorts of things that she was embracing and understanding as people were interacting with her. And she said, essentially, though it's none of those things. It's not that I have a marriage that I want to be completely, subservient in. It's not that sort of thing. It's more like I wanted to do something different. And it just happened to be 10 days before my wedding. And I think that is an important part for us to realize and understand. So when we are talking about change, this person in particular, she is very good at accepting change. And I just wanted to show an example of that. We'll only be watching a small clip, but here it is. Oh,
the body you are randomly assigned at birth.
Give me a second, sorry. All right, here we go.
Questions, but I would not talk about them here. But it's just to show you the misunderstanding that people had just because I decided to quit my job. See, you also have around you these people who don't get your decisions. They don't get why you want to install change in your life. They don't get why somehow, from a day to another, you decide to go left instead of right. You have these people around you. All they do, instead of supporting you, they're throwing these worries, that fear to you. And what happens? You take the fear and you don't do anything. You don't take action. And what you're doing, you're quitting on your dreams. And that is a pity. You hide behind the fear of change. But by the way, what is fear? I understood the definition of fear in 2003. And I'll tell you how. I come from a very beautiful country called the Central African Republic. It's in the center of Africa, beautiful country, but unfortunately, it's wounded by lots of civil wars since a couple of years. In 2003, my father was in the country. That's when I understood what fear really is. In 2003, I understood what fear really is, but I also understood what fear is not. Fear is not about quitting a job in order to pursue your dreams. Fear is not about letting go of a little bit of security in order to find greatness. Fear is not about letting go of a little bit of comfort in order to contribute to other people's lives. With my father in that country, I understood what fear really is. Fear is about not knowing if your loved one is in security. Fear is about not knowing if your loved one is safe. Fear is not knowing if your loved one, if you'll ever see that person again. That's what fear really is. So what are you hiding behind? Are you hiding behind comfort? Are you hiding behind that security that you think that you have? And because of that, of you hiding, you're just letting your dreams fly away. Imagine if these are your dreams, if this is your life, and you could just take that fear and throw it away. Who would you impact? What would you accomplish?
So I really like that video for a lot of different reasons, but what I really like about it is that she makes it, the way she interprets it is so simple. The world is just filled with change. It's filled with embracing change. And when we sort of say that it's really that simple, take this fear and throw it away and see what impact you can have. That is such a beautiful sentiment, but it can be scary. It's not something that's easy for everyone, but to understand that sometimes that's what people need. People need to be told, what are you fearful of? What are you afraid of? Just do it. And I think that that was something that I embraced at least once in my life, quite a few times. But I do have a skydiving story very quickly. I have gone skydiving before. I was 18 years old when it happened. And it was in Texas in 100-degree heat, but I did it anyway, and it was wonderful. But essentially, what I do want to say about this is that skydiving is not easy. For some people, it is really easy, but for me, it was difficult because I was saying, I'm going to be so much higher in the air. What am I going to do? How am I going to live my life after this? I don't know. Like, are my nerves going to stay on edge forever after this fall? And essentially what they do is you sign a waiver, you say yes. You get up in the air, you say yes. They ask you several times before you leave the plane, before you actually exit to skydive, whether or not you get to say yes. And each time in the back of my head, my instinct, my visceral reaction was to say no. Because I said, what if the parachute doesn't open? What if I fall to the ground? What if I die today? Those are all the sorts of thoughts that I had in my head. And really what it was saying, you know what, this is the fear that I had, and I'm still going to say yes anyway. And sometimes in that way, in that split second before we finally had that last question, Ruth, are you ready? Yes. I wanted to say no, but I said yes anyway. And when you say yes and you just do it, sometimes you have a really good experience, or at least a really good story to tell people. So I'm not saying that everyone should go out and go skydiving right now, but what I am saying is there are things in our lives that we can say yes to and not be complacent of. And I think that's a really important part of that as well. And for anyone wondering, yes, I was 18 at the time. Okay, so there's another thing that I sort of want to address as well. When people say, and I've heard this a lot, and I don't know why it frustrates me so, but a lot of people say, back in my day. And to be honest, I don't think that a lot of youth care about what you want to say about back in your day. And I want to make this clear by saying, when we say back in your day was different. My day was different. I did not grow up with social media the same way this generation did. I'm 25, by the way. I did not adapt to the changing of trends and the saturation of violence and news in the media. I did not talk about things in the same way I did when I was younger that people this generation are talking about now. We did not grow up the same way. The experiences may be the same. The first kiss, the first bad grade, the first bike ride, those sorts of things are definitely universal. They're definitely universal. They're definitely ubiquitous in that way. But I think that what we need to understand is that we are not. Oh yeah, Melissa, thank you for saying, yeah, when I was your age, we are never their age at this age. Yes, you are correct. That when we say that this person is experiencing the same exact things, that doesn't help the youth embrace change. That doesn't help them understand their situation. That doesn't help them feel better. But if we say it in a way that's empathetic, if we say it in a way that's coming from a way to relate to the youth, to the person that may be struggling with this, then maybe we are helping them more than saying back in my day, especially when people use it to say, oh, suck it up, things were harder back then. I don't think that helps with people embracing the environment around them. We will never be their age because they are experiencing things that we have never experienced at their age. And I think that is something very clear for us to understand as we move forward as well. And understand that also we need to validate their feelings. We need to validate what they're going through, because we don't know what that means in this context. Oh yeah, thank you, Brian. Yes, definitely. Speaking their language in real time helps. Absolutely. Yes, completely. So, speaking their language is that understanding what the lingo is like, maybe understanding, at least being on the pulse of what pop culture looks like these days, maybe possibly understanding references to TikTok, references on YouTube channels, different creators. Those are the sorts of things that people, especially youth these days, can really connect with because they're so saturated with this information. But also talk to them as if, I don't want to say you're talking to them as if you're talking to a friend, but talk to them in a way that lets them know that you understand that you don't understand what they're going through. And that really does help them open up and talk to you about the things that may be hurting them. So yes, all good things, all good advice. So thank you for that. All right. Here we go. All right. So I also want to say, what has Generation Z lived through? We're sort of going to talk about this because I think we need context to understand why they may feeling the certain way that they do. And daily life, understand that is influenced by the outside world. Obviously, the things that are happening here are not always what are happening on the outside world in other places and other parts of the world. But to understand that there are different ways that the world is interdependent on our society, that it does influence the way that we interact with our environment. Now, also just to akin back to the woman who was speaking before, understand that the Central African Republic, of the 179 countries that are listed on the UN's poverty index, the Central African Republic ranks in the bottom 1%. So obviously her life looks very different than what our lives may look like growing up as well. So their lives also are Generation Z's lives are influenced by the information that they get. So they may know a life that is different than theirs in another part of the world because they're interacting with other people in other parts of the world due to social media. Now, this in particular study, it's a marketing firm, or they look at a lot of marketing firms, and there was a lot of market research that was done. And I'm not going to click on it because I'm going to be listing the events already, but there was definitely some interesting finds and some unsurprising things as well that we sort of just knew that they had gone through. So I'm just going to read them off very quickly. Terrorism and war, social networking, smartphones, Great Recession, text messaging, gun violence, the election of the first Black president, shared family responsibilities, climate change, always wired connectivity. There's never a point where you don't have your phone in your hand. Volunteerism has definitely gone up in the past couple of decades. Corporate social responsibility. So multinational corporations having a sense of social capital and social responsibility to their workers and to the environments and countries that they're a part of. The Arab Spring democracy movement that definitely came to the forefront in the late 2010s. Gender equality, the Deepwater Horizon oil spills. Those are just some of the things that have happened. And these are some of the events that children of Generation Z have lived through. And just to understand that this market research and these events really do shape the way that Generation Z looks at their environment, looks at the way they interact with their world. And because of this, because of the saturation of social media, actually, Generation Z looks for a lot of authenticity. And there will be some trends that I talk about on the next page that I don't want to discuss right now, just because spoiler alert, we will be talking about authenticity and to understand that people, especially Generation Z, want authenticity because the world is so connected. There are so many things that are fake. There are so many things that don't feel genuine that they crave that authenticity. They crave that stability, which is why sometimes they can be resistant to change because everything else around them changes all the time. That when they find something that is stable, that is authentic, that is true to them and to people around them, they may be really resistant to changing that aspect of their lives. So what is in these days? We're going to be talking about the Pew Research. I think the Pew Research Center does a great work. They do a lot of different areas of research. They talk about a lot of different things, but really what they talk about essentially is public opinion polls and social trending. So we're going to just be looking at this very quickly together because I think that this is something that can help us understand how to interact, right? So Generation Z, we're going to look at this for a second. This is really interesting that I didn't know. I'm Hispanic, just in case anybody was wondering. 1 in 4 members of Gen Z are Hispanic. So I find that very fascinating. But Gen Z is the most racially diverse and ethnically diverse group that we've ever had in American history. So that is something that we need to take into account as we're moving forward as well. Gen Z is also on track to be the best educated generation. That is not surprising. The more access to education, the more access that people have to information, which means that they may want to actually be a more activist culture and society, which is something that we are seeing, that Generation Z is more likely than other generations to want an activist government to provide resources and individual resources to society and communities. They also are more likely to say climate change is due to human activity. They are more Gen Z Republicans are more likely than Republicans in older generations to say Blacks are treated less fairly. There are a lot of different things that Gen Z holds important to them that we may not necessarily look at or think about more readily. About half of Gen Z say that same-sex marriage is good for society. So these are the sorts of things that we're looking at here. There are a lot of statistics that say that Gen Z is looking for change. Gen Z is looking for societal change. Gen Z is looking for a sort of more accepting and progressive world. And that is not to say that there are people that are not conservative in that they want things to stay the same, but it is to say that Gen Z in reality does look for change and does embrace it on a very visceral level, but to also understand in their lives, they look for authenticity. And we'll be looking at this here. So this Forbes article is a great article to talk about the rise of actual social commerce. And there were quite a few different things that we were looking at there. But I just wanted to read one part of this article because 97% of Gen Z consumers say they now use social media as their top source of shopping inspiration. 65% say they use social media to find entertaining content, and 61% of them are specifically interested in watching more video content. So that shows that Generation Z is really interacting with a lot of social media. And also to say that trends are all about embracing one thing and moving on to the next. So there's a lot of transitioning at an unprecedented rate here. Oh, and also there are quite a few TikTok things here that talk about TikTok made me buy it, which is a great hashtag on TikTok because you do find things that are actually really helpful. There have been things on TikTok that I've bought that TikTok kind of made me buy. So they say that there is a new way of Gen Z, that Gen Z has shaped the way people buy things. Gen Z has shaped the way people market things. So I find that fascinating as well. And because of all of this, and this sort of article talks a little bit about it later on, and you can read it, it will be cited in the description below, is that Gen Z, because of all of these things, they are looking for a sense of authenticity and a sense of stability because there are so many other things that are uncertain to them, especially, because of the social aspects that are happening these days, the wake of a lot of social movements and a lot of the pandemic especially, has changed Gen Z to want to look at how stability can interact with their lives, that there's so much change going on in the world that they are grasping onto the things that they want to make stable, which is why they want so much change, because they feel that the things around them are not stable right now. So they will look at that change and grasp onto it for stability, which I find an interesting oxymoron, but that definitely is something that is a trend these days. So I think that we sort of discussed a lot about how Gen Z interacts with their environment, how they're sort of embracing or not embracing change. And a lot of the time when we say, well, that's life to children, I don't think that that really helps them understand that change can be a good thing, that change can be something to be embraced, that change is inevitably part of life. And I've always said, and I will continue to say, especially nowadays, I say that life may not be fair, but I refuse for it to be unkind. And we were talking to Generation Z about life and about how and what they can control. Let's understand that we need to give them the tools to do that and not say just deal with it. That we need to give them the actual realities and say, here's how you can cope with things happening around you. So I will be playing this video now, and it's by Creative Mind, I think they're called. Oh, Create Imperfect. They are very good at discussing change. And I think that this video is really good. It's a really good graphic for educators to use in their classroom as well.
I hated the idea of change. I hated the idea of being able to not be able to control my life. And one thing my mom used to always say to me is, Charles, the only thing consistent in life is change. And I hated this. I hated this to no end, because when she used to say this, I instantly felt powerless, hopeless, unable to control anything. And the problem is, as I've gotten older, that has not changed. I still feel pretty uncomfortable with change. And I think many of us deal with that situation where we feel uncomfortable. We hate it because in a lot of ways with change comes fear. It comes the feeling of fear. It comes the feeling of being powerless. It comes the feeling of not having control. And so today I want to offer you guys 3 tips that may help you deal with change. Let's go. So tip number 1 is be flexible and learn to embrace change. A lot of times when we first encounter change, a lot of times when we first have to deal with change, our immediate reaction is to put up a defense, is to protect ourselves and keep us as far away from change as possible. But in order for us to be happy in life, in order for us to be able to fully accept life and all of its changes, we must learn to embrace change and learn to be flexible with change. Tip number 2 is face your fears. Now, we all have fears when it comes to change. For me, when I was a kid, moving to a new school always brought that fear. The fear of having to meet new people, of having to deal with new teachers, and maybe having a difficult time readjusting to a new area when I was a child. As an adult, I have different fears when it comes to change. But we all have fears in general when it comes to change. There's certain things about the change itself that makes us afraid. But if we can learn to embrace those fears and face them, we can become successful. We can learn to be happy even despite the fears themselves. So one thing I want to say is a great way to face your fears is by writing down these fears, by putting them on paper, by taking ourselves out of the situation and putting them on paper and looking at it objectively. We can stop dwelling on it and being stuck on the fears and learn to let them go. The final tip I want to leave with you guys is to focus on the things that you can control. Life will throw you a lot of different curveballs. It will go a lot of different directions we may not want life to go. It may go right when we want it to go left. It may take a U-turn when we want life to go straight. Change is inevitable. It's unstoppable. So although we may not control the world around us, the weather, other people, or situations as a whole, what we can control, the one thing we can control, is our attitude and our actions. If you find yourself in a situation where you're afraid and you know that change is inevitable, learn to control yourself. Like I said earlier, some of the most successful people in life are able to be flexible, are able to face their fears and control not the world around them, themselves. They're able.
Okay, so he tends to go on, but I really like this because, one, it is very visual, it's very graphic. It shows how people can embrace change and how these tips with transitioning can help with people embracing that part of their lives. And I sort of wanted to use this as an example to sort of complement the story that I had, where I was in a Too Good for Drugs class where we were talking about things about control, right? And making decisions in our own right and in a full holistic way is us taking control of our day-to-day life. Our decisions make us. Our decisions help us understand what kind of control we have. Our decisions are the control that we have. And so when we were talking about this, she said, I make no decisions. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, because my life, everything's chosen for me. I have no control over anything. And we sort of got into it a little bit more. And this student in particular was talking about how at home there's a lot going on and that she feels out of control, and there are so many people around her that make her life harder, that make her life and her interactions harder to deal with. And so we were talking about it, and I said, all right, that is very hard. I'm so sorry that things are happening at home. There was a lot to address there. We talked to the teacher. There was definitely a protocol, but at the same time, when we were discussing, I said, what decisions can you make today in order for you to feel like you are more in control? And she's like, I have nothing. And I said, well, what about the things that you eat? What about the things that you say? What about the clothes that you wear? What about the shoes that you decide to put on? What about the words that you say to your friends, to your teachers? What about the amount of attention that you give to a certain subject, to a certain place? And so those are the sorts of things that people may look at, and these may be minute to some people, but for children who are in situations that can be harder for them, those are the things that matter the most. Those are the things that they have to have control over. Otherwise, they will feel helpless. So in order for us to understand that, I also get that when we were talking about control, it's not like saying, oh, the world is your oyster. You have complete control over your life. When you're a youth, that's not really the reality. Sometimes people don't have control over their lives in a lot of ways. So for us to be empathetic towards that, for us to understand that, that can also help us, help them embrace the changes that may come. Now, I also have here an article on 3 meditative practices to help you cope with change. There are a lot of different ways that that people look at change. I already have 3 tips here. We're going to be talking about a life skills practice and a coping skill that we use on the next slide. But essentially, what they talk about is the different types of breathing techniques. And one that I teach to my kids and the people I teach to is deep breathing or square breathing. And a lot of people may have heard of this before, but for those of you that haven't, it's a 4-4-4 method where you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds, and release your breath for 4 seconds. And essentially, I have seen the physical difference in children using this technique. And I think it's because, one, it's scientifically proven to lower your heart rate, to help you think more clearly. It gives you a sense of control in your breathing. And when you control your breath, I think that you can control a lot of things, because our bodies are the things that we must master. And if we can control our breath, that's the first part of that, right? So that definitely gives something that people can look at and can use for later use. So yeah, we're going to be talking about, I suggested, reframing and perspective. And so a lot of people wonder, what is reframing? And obviously it's in the name, so we're just going to sort of look at this that way. What is reframing? Reframing is taking one particular event or one particular thing and looking at it through another lens. So if they interacted with a friend, and that friend wasn't nice to them, and they were like, oh, you know what? No one likes me anymore. My friend, we're no longer friends. I think that reframing that and saying, maybe your friend had a bad day. Maybe it's nothing about you. Maybe they're going through something at home. Maybe they're going through something personal. So reframing can definitely help bring that and sort of narrow down and ground the youth when they may be going through something that they consider a crisis. Now, what also is perspective? Perspective can be a lot of different things. And what I think is really interesting and creates a sense of empathy and a sense of embracing of change is teaching empathy in the way of perspective and saying, well, this person may have thought about it this way. This person may have thought about it this way. When we look at perspective and we embrace that part of interaction and of dealing with change, that it helps children look at it in a different way, where they feel that, okay, you know what, maybe I am in more control than I thought. And even if they're not in control, at least they can understand where that's coming from. There are a lot of different lenses to look through when they're talking about this as well. There are quite a few different lenses, and we do talk about this in quite a lot of detail in the life skills training program that we have at the Mercer Council. But essentially, when we're talking about lenses and we're talking about the way people reframe and the way that perspective is shaped, these lenses are the ones that we look through. Now, perspective is saying, oh, this person's perspective, but the lens is looking through it, much as the magnifying glass that I have there is sort of dissecting what that looks like and understanding it holistically for people to move on and move forward and accept that part of that change and that part of that situation. Now, I have quite a few different ways that we're looking about this here. So I have quite a lot of resources that I will be having in the YouTube description, but this one is great. I don't like the name of the website. It's called quickanddirtytips.com, but it's about parenting, and it's how to help your child embrace change. And there are great tips on there that people can look at. There's also another article that Forbes had talked about, and this person was actually doing a lot of different surveys on Generation Z. And it says basically they crave stability and trust, so give it to them. And what they had essentially said, and I'm going to cite a piece here from the article, It said, due to the pandemic, just as some of them are entering the workforce, they saw their jobs disappear or hours reduced more than any other generation. That is true. 81% say the US is on the wrong track. Only 5% strongly agree that the world is a fair place. Despite all of this, 62% believe that they have the potential to change the world. All of that creates a lot of pressure on this young cohort. It leads to a lot of stress. Now, there are obviously bad parts to what I just read, but there are so many good parts too, that when people are looking at the way things are changing around them, when they're interacting with their environment, when they're scared, they also have hope that the world will be better. And I think that's what's so interesting about Generation Z is that there are so many things that can happen to them. There's so many things that can hurt them. There are so many ways that society is changing, but they still look at the world and say, I can still change it. I can still embrace the change. I can still embrace that things are changing and move forward from there. So those numbers are very helpful, and they're very helpful to understand the disparities of what Generation Z may be going through at this time. So I always end my presentations with how can we help? One, understand what is normal for each youth you're working with. Normal is baseline. So anything that goes up or down, that's the change, and to sort of look at and see how their environment is changing and how they are interacting with their environment. Two, be understanding of the resistance you may face. There may be things that need to be changed and they don't want that. Sometimes they just don't need it because there's so many other things changing. They may want that one thing to stay the same. Create an environment where stability is also a place they can arrive at. So I would, in another way, create a sense of a safe space, a sense of safety for children to fall on soft, like they want to fall softly on something. They want to fall on a landing that will help them not be injured, that will help them embrace the change in a way that's comfortable and go through the growing pains without feeling like they're debilitating anybody else. Be involved in the lives of the children that you work with. That's important. Know what their daily life looks like. Understand you may only see them for a certain amount of time during the day, or you may be with them all the time, but really just be involved as you can so that you can look for those factors of any adverse childhood experiences that may be coming their way. Practice life skills with the youth you work with. So the reframing, the perspective, the lenses, the deep breathing, the squared breathing, those are all sorts of things that come from life skills, but all sorts of things that help children cope with life. Also, lead by example. Show them how you embrace and work with change. And I think that children are definitely socialized by their peers, but in reality, they are definitely socialized by you too. The way that you interact with your world, the way that you embrace transitions, the way that you embrace change can be a great example or a not so good example for children to look at and understand how to interact with their environment. So children are always looking to us. Children are always looking to see what we're going to do because they don't have any lived experiences. We do. And we will use those lived experiences to help us embrace that change so that we can lead as an example for the generation coming up. Now, I always close my presentations with quotes just because I feel like there are a lot of different ways that we can talk about it, but sometimes people just say it better than I do. And I have two quotes that I always use when talking about change. Change begins at the end of your comfort zone by Roy T. Bennett. And I definitely agree with that sometimes we just have to be a little uncomfortable to embrace the things that can be good for us. Also, another one is the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And I think that's also looking at change as an opportunity for us, as an opportunity for us to tell youth how they can and what they can do to embrace change. Now, thank you for being here. Thank you all for just stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Next week, we will be talking about the marijuana and cannabis policy. So we're really looking forward to that. And thank you for coming and hope to see you again.